My name is Dan Dorval, and I'm President and CEO of Dorval and Cherney Financial Advisors. I am an independent certified financial planner and author of my book, Financial Success for the Rest of Us, Reality-Based Financial Planning for Mainstream America.
Hi, my name is Leah Woodley. I'm an associate financial advisor with Dorval and Cherney Financial Advisors. Our conversations discuss what it means to do quality of life planning in all areas of your life.
Dan, in your book, you talk about estate planning. And so I would like us to cover that today. So, a lot of times people think that estate planning is just for wealthy individuals, and you speak contrary to that. Why don't you talk about that?
Well, really, everyone has some need for estate planning. It's just some are more complicated than others. Some might be as simple as, maybe a basic will or a power of attorney or a healthcare directive. But what happens a lot of times is many financial advisors do work with wealthy people. They are working through very complex estate planning issues that might involve taxes and all sorts of other considerations for passing large amounts of money or property down to their heirs. And then they get attorneys involved. And then this is the estate planning that then gets pushed out to the world through AI or media or anything else. And then people who have none of those issues start to go, well, should I really have a trust? Should I really have this? Should I have that? And we look at them and we go, okay, you should do estate planning, but you don't need all of those things. We have to put all of that information in context for them to let them know the steps that they need to take now. And those steps continuously evolve over time throughout our lifetime.
I often see that, especially online when it comes to trust. Everyone's like, oh, I need a trust because that's what rich people have. And so I'm glad that you highlighted that. But yes, all of us do need it at some point. What key life events or changes should prompt someone to create or to even update an estate plan?
So the primary one is getting married. And then the secondary to getting married is having children. And then when we go from there, a divorce is a major time for that. And especially if you remarry after a divorce. So we just had a couple, they came to meet us and they were a mixed family where they each had three kids from a prior marriage. They had no children together. And so their estate planning gets much more complicated because what we don't want to ever do is disinherit the kids from one side of the family, which is very easy to do. Now, one thing for like younger people, and maybe you're not married yet and you're single and you're saying, well, I don't need an estate plan. The basics there are you want to still set up a power of attorney. And a power of attorney is very easy to do. I mean, in Minnesota, we can do it through the state of Minnesota actually has a short form power of attorney statutory form that you can print off for free, and you would just name somebody that if you are incapacitated in some way, they can act on your behalf. So that's part of estate planning. Now, as far as a will, that person could still put together a very simple will, and there are online resources where you could do this for free. So if you're single, you just want to make sure, hey, if I want this to go to a sibling, or maybe I want it to go to my parents, or whatever it happens to be, your wishes are at least written down somewhere. Now, if you have not created a will, it's not the end of the world because the state has created a will for you. And so if your circumstances are like simple enough, you don't have to necessarily worry about those documents. It's more important to have a power of attorney and a healthcare directive just in case something happens to you.
I'm glad you mentioned that states do provide it. Many states do have that for free online where you can download those power of attorney and advanced directive forms to fill out. Now, you do typically have to have a witness or a notary depending on the state, but that is something that is readily available. And I'm also glad that you highlighted that, the main documents that are needed in place. And you also mentioned that you can do a will online. Why don't you talk about knowing the difference of when it's appropriate to do one online versus consulting a legal professional?
Yeah, it's a great question because I can tell you the resources available now are dramatically better than they used to be. So you can get some free resources or very inexpensive resources online that are they're quite good. And a lot of attorneys will charge you, quite a bit of money, maybe thousands of dollars to do a basic estate plan. They're just using a template document in many cases where they're plugging your information in. And if you just plug that information in yourself, some of the AI resources can do that for you. So what I typically say is, first off, it's your comfort level of where you want that attorney relationship, because we're certainly not going to discourage anyone from seeking legal counsel. But if you are single, or maybe you're married and you don't have children yet, and you want to take care of some of these basic documents, a lot of times that is a very simple process and you do not need to pay a lot of money. This is assuming you don't have a lot of assets. It's assuming you probably don't have property in more than one state. So sometimes having property in more than one state, that would potentially lead to probate in more than one state, and that could create a headache for your heirs. So if somebody is single, or maybe they're married with no children, that might be a time where they could do a very simple, maybe an online type of approach if they're comfortable with that. Now, once you have children, or certainly in more complicated situations where you have property in multiple states, maybe you have a lot of property, so you start to worry about estate taxes or other concerns like that, bringing an attorney into the equation and discussing more complicated scenarios in your context, that actually becomes, much more relevant. So there's kind of a time and a place to each one, and it usually has to do with the amount of resources you have, the types of property you own, and then your marital situation in the context of children.
I'm sure that answer just helped a lot of people because I'm sure that is a big question that a lot of people have. Now, going back to your own estate planning journey when you first started preparing these documents, what were you focused on when you were thinking about what documents you needed?
Yeah, the biggest, most important thing is, once we had children, is not so much thinking about how assets are going to be distributed. Because if one spouse dies, it goes to the other spouse. If both spouses died, it goes to the kids. But the biggest thing is if you have minor children, you want to be aware that if both of you were to pass away, now if you have no wishes written down, the court is going to decide who has physical custody of those children, and then also who potentially has financial custody of those children over that period of time, who's going to make decisions as a trustee for their benefit. And so a lot of times we'll tell people it's not so much that you need these estate planning documents for determining where the money goes. A lot of times people think that's what it's for. What we wanted to do is make sure that we named who was going to be the physical guardians of our children until they were old enough to take care of themselves. And then, second, these kids are going to be getting a lot of money in the form of life insurance proceeds, maybe retirement accounts, or, all of the different assets we have. Who is the person that's going to be acting in their best interest on their behalf? And then, do we really want those kids to get a whole bunch of money when they're like 18 or 21 years old, and maybe they're not in the best, age or level of wisdom to be able to make good financial decisions? So then we also laid out, we were going to have a testamentary trust created for their benefit. Testamentary meaning it's created upon death or after death. And then that would create a trust with a trustee for their benefit. And they were going to get some money at 21, some money at 25, and then the rest of it would be distributed by 30, knowing full well they might make some financial mistakes when they're young and, maybe not doing the best things in life. But we now have created a mechanism so that they can't just blow through all of that money when they're 21 years old. Now, along the way, that trustee can still use that money for their health, education, welfare. Like if they need money to buy a car or they need money to go to college or whatever, those are perfectly legitimate uses of that money, but somebody has to be named to help them with that process.
That is so important, and I'm so glad that you shared that with us. Is there any last tidbits you would like to share with those who are watching?
I think estate planning is one of those things that we have a tendency to procrastinate because, first off, we're talking about our potential mortality. Nobody really gets excited about talking about dying. And then that thought leads us to say, well, it's probably not going to happen to me. And unfortunately, in today's world, we're going to see things like maybe there's a church fundraiser or a community fundraiser for, maybe a young widow that has a couple of kids at home and, her spouse passed away and she's got to take care of those kids. And unfortunately, they didn't take care of, the planning associated with that, whether it's estate planning or life insurance and all these considerations, and they get put in a very difficult, very sad situation. And what you can see is, especially if two parents die, which isn't often, but certainly when it happens, those children just had their life turned completely upside down. And the last thing you want to do is have a court deciding, who's going to be responsible for them, and then have family members potentially fight over that. So you want to make sure that you've taken these things into account, before something happens, so that you have the peace of mind of knowing that, heaven forbid, if you did die prematurely, your family's taken care of.
Well, thank you for sharing all the information that you did on this important and critical topic. Until next time, have a good one.
Thanks, Leah.
Thank you.